How do we? Oh well, we're back at it, Broads. This is
That's
we don't even have a name. We don't even have a name for it yet, do we?
the as yet unnamed podcast. Welcome,
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm actually in Bali. Well, let's just pretend it's Bali or Thailand or somewhere exotic. But in actual fact, it's about 20 minutes, half an hour from where I normally live, and on the way out west, and it's in a shopping center of all places. But yeah,
Y-
I mean,
You
that's
know,
like a food court, so right up your alley.
Mr. Dubois, I got to tell you, I love you to death, and I love Australia to death. But that very that very macabre is the one thing that just pisses me off. The idea that you need to seek out some sort of paradise when you're in it. That that
Yeah, true,
that that is
true.
where they keep Australia. Apparently, it's in
Yeah.
paradise.
Well, like I mentioned the other week, and a lot of the listeners would know the the dude who was destined to probably pull some decent numbers, Will Crozier, um, from Nexus, a good friend of yours and someone you
Yeah.
speak very highly of, and you're working with him a little, and trying to get him. I think you had numbers. What was it? 130 kilos you wanted at least, and he was
Yeah.
just stuck at. I think he was stuck at high 115, between 115 and 120 or something. But
Yeah.
anyway, he I caught up with him the other day, and it was in KFC of all places. And no, I don't normally do that, but occasionally you got to do what you got to do. And the other half loves some chicken fillet with the secret herbs and spices. And of course, I had to come along for the ride. But in walked Will, and and we were just catching up, and you were obviously the topic of conversation eventually. And yeah, it did point out that you do actually probably want to, at some point try and live down this way. So that would be absolutely amazing. Not that you'd ever retire, but one day we might actually be graced with your presence full time, maybe.
Yeah, the legal hurdles and all of that
Yeah.
is very much a separate thing. But I can't. I literally I know it's seemingly hard for you to understand. I think you get a little frustrated with there, but yeah, Australia, particularly the Sydney area, just
Mm,
offers everything that I want. It is
mm,
a I mean, it's corny to say, but it's a beautiful city. The
mm,
um
mm.
the one of the first things you do, you go to see the harbor and you see
Yeah,
the opera house, and everyone spends their time oogling at the buildings in the opera house and the botanical
mm,
garden leading up to it. I have not
gorgeous.
yet had my fill of that. I've been there every time, and I've spent days in there, and I'm not tired of it. I love the weather. I love
Yeah.
it's a corny thing again, something that you're probably pretty passe about, but
Mm,
the public trans. It's so easy
mm,
to get around. I've been all over the world, and I have
mm,
not been a single place that is easy to
mm.
get around as Sydney.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you went the light rail a little bit too, didn't you? You hopped on and off the light rail. That's pretty good. I used it yesterday. Um, yeah, it's kind of it is easy to get around, I must say.
Hmm.
Yeah, pretty straightforward, idiot proof. Which is you're a fan of.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
But no,
So
I really do. I really do. I'm an enthusiast of the Sydney
mm,
area. Let's call it that. Yeah.
yeah, look, we do actually do. One does take it for granted, but occasionally there'll be a moment where it's like you look around and you go, you know what, it's yeah, pretty good. It's pretty good. So
Yeah.
I agree with you. I'm always very happy to come back, and I am sporting the Evil Genius represent, and it's I don't know if you can see it, the Vegas edition from when I was your way last year, about this time
Absolutely.
last year, a bit earlier. And it's always good to come home. It's kind of like, yeah, you know what. But I'm like you. I don't particularly like to travel, and I like my cup of coffee in the morning from my usual cafe, and I like to train at my usual gym and all that type of stuff. Um, I don't know if it was you that messaged me, but someone said, because you guys do the 5 hardcore gyms, I think in the UK, and I watched some of that, and it's like, yeah, that sounds mad. And then I don't know if it was you or Mitch or someone said, hey, you got 5 down under, and I'm like, you know what, I don't really get around to hardcore gyms. I said I could name a couple that I've been to. There's Doherty's in Melbourne. That's pretty. It's got a lot of. You
Standard, yeah.
probably, yeah. You might have even went there in Melbourne.
Yeah.
The one in the city, with
I,
with
I,
the
I
train.
did I did not go there, but I mean, I'm well aware of it. I mean, that goes back to the 80
Yeah,
Olympia, Arnold thing. Like
yeah,
that's kind of standard fare.
yeah. So that's probably. And then I went to one in to that, and then I went to. I can think of two. I went to one World Gym. I think it might have been Ashmore or something in Queensland, not too far from Will's place, I think, on the Gold Coast. But and that was pretty decently hardcore. They were pretty much. I was at 100 and I don't know 6 7 kilos, was like felt tiny, and there was everyone roostering about the place, beating their chest with. Not my scene. That all had their tea backs on, covered in tattoos, but there were some. Yeah, majority were really really jacked. But other than that, like I can't. I haven't really been to too many gyms, so it was a bit of a fail. So well,
That's
I'll
fair
get
enough.
back to you on that one, man. Anytime Fitness, Circular Key. I don't know if that cuts it. That's a hardcore gym, but we'll see what we can do. So yeah, we kind of discussed last week what kind of things we'll talk about, and then we both kind of, as we do, we'll just talk about shit and see if we get some decent
Yeah,
content.
I suppose we should put forth some like vague mission statement, and I think the mission, if it were, and that will probably evolve, but at least topically, we're thinking just covering bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman in Australia, in the U.S., and just kind of any sort of international shit in the middle that kind of just strikes our fancy, if that's
Yeah,
fair.
yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kick things off with this is hot off the press. So I had
All right.
someone that you respect, and it's in line with a lot of the conversations we have, and a lot of the listeners, obviously, the viewers will love the discussion about blood work, and I saw Mitch share Nicholas Weir. I think Nick. He big mofo from Queensland, and he's a
Yeah.
fan of the Evil Genius, and he was putting a post up about get your bloods done, and then Mitch reposted it and said, listen to the statement again, and something that you've said from the get go, from and the guys might not realize that all kind of started with. I mean, we kind of Mike Israel gets a hard time in the group, but he was what connected myself with
Mhm.
you, and it was almost like an interview process. It was now this guy, he's got to you just got to chat with him. If he likes you, then yeah, he's a wealth of knowledge. I highly recommend it because I was mentoring with Mike back in the day and talking about all sorts of stuff, and I did my time mentoring with him, and before he became what he is today, and it'd be hard pressed
Superstar.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's busy AF, and as we all are these days, I guess. But and then we had a chat, and then we hit it off from there. But blood work was something that even back then you were hammering me about, and it was Dr. Scott Stevenson is who I was talking to. So someone that you
Yeah.
definitely you guys haven't kind of connected, but he's well aware of you. I mention you all the time when I talk to him, and he's a fan of Crossland, and
Okay.
is well aware of what you guys are doing. And a fan, if I mean reading between lines, it seems to be a fan of what you're doing. Not that that means anything to you, of course, but it was basically it was kind of the topic of conversation evolved from why do some get a better response from others with gear, basically. There's no, even though like we know the fundamentals, this should be doing this converts to that, and this is this type of drug. Independent of that, and you have seen this, and maybe not as much as probably what I have, because you generally elite. I mean,
Yeah.
who do you work with? Elite athletes, IFBB pros. I mean, these guys respond to everything, So
Right.
you're kind of spoilt with these drugs will do what they're supposed to do because you've got the genetics for them to do that. But the rest of us, mere
Absolutely.
mortals, I see time and time again that compounds X, Y, and Z just don't net the change that they should be with what I've seen with others too. You know, similar kind of stacks, if you will, and vastly different results. And yeah, nutrition, training, that plays a role, absolutely. Lifestyle, sleep, all that type of stuff, but similar in that regard. So it stemmed from that conversation, which is interesting, and we can go into that another time. But this was to do with I think it was a Dean St. Martin. You would be familiar with him, maybe that
Mhm.
doctor, and he kind of posted some interesting stuff. And it was, long story short, the post was about an individual that was using, it's to do with toxicity. Okay, so understand that's what we're going to get to, and whether there's a threshold of toxicity, and beyond it, you're spinning your wheels and you can't just throw more into it. And sometimes less is more. And it kind of fits with your, we'll start somewhere, titrate up, and probably in that process, titrating up, if things go south, okay, well, you know where the sweet spot is. Another reason, probably indirectly, you do what you do. But
Correct.
it was kind of along the lines of, this individual thought the compounds were underdosed, taking X amount of gear, and but they checked all the took it to be tested, and the gear was good, the test was good. And long story short, it ended up being, he looked at all the blood markers, and there were signs of inflammation, and it ended up being, I don't know if he went on to be diagnosed as celiac, but there were certainly issues with gluten and intolerance of some description, and it was elevating this P450 enzyme, which you'd probably be able to rattle off as if that was
Yep.
X, Y, Z. But
So liver
metabol
cytochrome. Yeah.
and it's the main metabolizing gear, I think, or androgens. It's the one of the
Correct.
main enzymes to get that out of the
Yeah,
body,
yeah,
which
it's
the
a
liver does.
hepatic cytochrome. Basically, when you say liver enzyme, that's a really generic term.
Yeah,
There's families of cytochromes, and the CYP family is specific, and then the 450 is the not the only, but it's the primary mover of drug metabolism. Works in
yes,
tandem
that.
with the pancreas.
Mm, okay, so this particular enzyme was through the roof, initiated by this inflammation from
Mhm.
a food choice. That's what they traced it back, did your science and
Yep.
data, and looked at things and concluded. And basically, it was just like the impression I got, it was kind of all the gear was being metabolized due to this P450 being through the roof,
Yep.
where normally it wouldn't be. And he wasn't left with much in the system to actually bind to said receptor and do all the full shit that it's going to do. So it was kind of, then segue, which is really interesting, and you can comment on that. But then it got into like this whole kind of, this toxicity, how some experience greater degrees of toxicity, and then this inflammation can be compromising our gains essentially. And the
Mhm.
tendency is, well, X amount of gear is not working, TDM method, let's throw more at it. But he was saying that there's a sweet spot that some will, and you do see this and hear this time and time again, that pro whatever, they're under a gram of gear and it works well, and maybe because they went over a gram and shit just went south, and they all got the side effects and didn't get any better gains. But it was kind of like more gear, then more conversion to estrogen, maybe more conversion to DHT, more side effects from those two, and just this kind of toxic. There was a general term of toxicity, which we then broke down. Well, how do we see toxicity on blood work? And I rattled a few things off that you've referenced. Your AST, your GGT, your EGFR. He loved CRP, so an inflammation marker. He loved checking that.
A1C also would factor in there.
Yeah, HbA1c, and kind of, there's no like test for see if you're toxic. It's it would be hematocrit. Is that what you said, HCT? Or but hematocrit being elevated, and kind of maybe cholesterol values out of whack, and all these things kind of escalating, and then it's kind of, well, where do you draw the line? It's
Yeah.
yeah. So that was the topic of conversation. So I thought we could kind of, I don't know,
Well,
spitball all that, and how big an
there's a
influence you think.
there's a whole bunch of I don't really have a formulated response, but a whole bunch of little light bulbs went off. In no particular order. If you remember back, somebody that you have a relationship and I sadly do not. But Milo Saichev was a very
Yeah,
big proponent of food allergy testing,
yeah,
probably
that's right.
indirectly for that reason. I wonder if he had it that fleshed out. I'm not trying to diminish the man. I'm just saying, like, he had a lot of
Yeah,
balls. I wonder if he
yeah.
had it that fleshed out. But he seemingly was very convinced that food sensitivities impacted net performance, and I buy that. So that's
Yeah.
the first light bulb that went off. And then the second one is I just presented in the UK, but not really here, there, or anywhere else for this story or for this conversation. But I remember using this particular analogy or parable, if you will, that seemed to hit home. I was trying to illustrate the idea that overtraining doesn't come from one thing. It's not just how much weight, sets and reps you do with a barbell. It's also how much cardio. It's almost also your job, your lifestyle. It's also steps. It's also the things you do for recovery. It's your massage and chiropractic and mobility. And anytime you're taxing the system, even if it's in a good way, you're still taxing the system. And that kind of comes out of your bank account. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
lo
yeah.
and behold, at the end of the day, a normal everyday purchase that should be well within your budget could bounce a check because you spent on these other things. And
Yeah.
I think, in a sense, you're actually taking my sort of overtraining isn't really one thing to taking it up a higher level yet, which is kind of usually my gig. Fair play and well played, but you're taking it up one level and just saying that kind of health is not one thing, but all of these factors. And in a just kind of a blanket sense, I would pretty much agree with everything you laid out there. That strikes me as very, very real. And then the last little light bulb that went off is I won't use names, but I can name 10 relatively prominent famous athletes that say, like, I'm at a position in my career where I want to go all in. I want to just dot every I, cross every T. I want to take my dosages up to whatever I need to really to do it. And sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't. But the moral is, out of those cases, all but one, more dosage didn't generate more results.
Interesting. I was going to ask that with you because, and we can throw him under the bus, I think, because he doesn't mind and he's a big fan. But Hudson, I think when he started working with you, it was one of his comments that came out of his mouth was, well, actually, yeah, I ended up doing much less gear than what I was previously. And I think
Yeah.
I mean, now he's an exception to the rule. Like looking at his blood work, probably wouldn't tell you too much going on, I suppose, because I think he's got 3 kidneys. So
Yes,
that probably
three
helps a little
kidneys
bit.
and yeah, we're talking about IFBB pro Andrew Hudson from South Africa, who is a good friend. I spend time with him every opportunity I get, and yes, and he's comfortable about talking these things, and he is literally, people use use the language too much, like, oh, he's a genetic freak. This guy is actually a genetic freak, as in he has been and
Physiology.
should still be studied. He is unique. He literally has 3 functioning kidneys. For those of you that don't know, you only get 2. He got a third one.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. I've seen the imaging. You obviously have a spine down the middle of your fucking body, so you got a kidney on each side, the spine in the middle. His on his left side, the one kidney's turned funny, and the other one sits like this. So he's got 2 kidneys like this, his spine, and then a kidney where he's supposed to have. It's the goddamnedest thing. But
Yeah.
but yes, he came to me with this sort of, not sort of, a journal of, I've done this and I did this to compete in this show. And so we said, all right, we kind of
Yeah.
know where we theoretically know where the butter zone is. And then
Yep.
I said, but because you're at such ground level, you're untrained, you haven't been exposed to drugs. Let's start at these very, very low numbers, because my methodology, and I'm not trying to take super credits are here, but it is my functioning methodology that let's if you're broke, a fiver, your wealth has gone up astronomically.
Yeah.
So in that train of thought, let's start at just a ridiculously low dose, exploit it, then raise it as needed, exploit it, raise it as needed. So that was the methodology in which we engaged, and we were expecting to go up into the 3.5 gram range, which is
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
he was to win these shows. And lo and behold, at 1,500 milligrams, he was where he would
Responding.
have been otherwise. And
Yeah.
I don't want to say it was purely because of that methodology. It was also he was older, he was more mature, he had a better
Sure.
lifestyle. There were a
Yeah.
lot of complicit factors. I'm not trying to be like, oh, come to me and I could, teach you how to take half the drugs. No,
Yeah.
but my
Yeah.
point is when everything's operating smoothly, when the
Sure.
system is very coherent, it doesn't seem like dosage is the prime mover.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. So, do you, in that same breath, like, do you think this is playing a role in, because many maybe don't kind of embrace the getting the lifestyle sorted, and sure, Milos is jiggy with that, and I'm sure there are
100%.
other great coaches, and they tend to throw more, or you're left to, well, shit, I don't really know what the catalyst is. I'm not getting the response that I am, but it's because I've been eating the same food for however long. And then they throw more gear, and then this toxicity, that blanket term, which could be all sorts of organs or systems that are under duress, I suppose. And it's and then you kind of have that use by date, and that's why they tend to look, even though they're, and I'm throwing them all under the bus,
Yeah,
obviously, but
no,
it's kind of like,
I'm with you, Rowdon. I really, really am. But I think in the context you're putting it in, kind of like why do pros do what they do kind of question. Unfortunately, I think there's so many sub factors. The people that go into high level bodybuilding aren't
mm,
hyper patient. They're not hyper, conservative. Like they're
yeah,
sort of the phenotype that's gonna just be like fucking launch this thing, you know.
yeah, let's
So
send it.
I think there's an awful lot of factors and variables there, but I'm not sure if it was your point, but it was certainly a point. I do believe that when people run up to a barrier, their instinct is to throw more drugs at it. I
Mm,
think their instinct should be step back and look at the big picture and
mm,
see if some bad habit, bad behavior, outside stress has crept in there. I don't know how many times I see, and I won't throw anyone specifically under the bus, but
sure.
very, very loud internet voices that
Mm,
spend all day telling you how hard they train. And when I watch them, I do not see that.
mm. What do you elaborate? What are you seeing? Just not much load moving, or it's not about
See,
the load? It's just the intensity of their training, their
well,
engagement.
Well, fuck. Boy, I don't want to change that. I don't want to change the tenor of this conversation because I like where we're going. But
Yeah,
intensity is a word that I cringe at every time.
I
In
know. That's why I said
physics,
it.
in physics, and the way that I look at training, the Eastern European models that were developed in the 19 fucking 50s, intensity specifically means load on the bar.
Sure,
So when I talk about training hard, I'm not necessarily talking about load on the bar, i.e., intensity. I'm talking about effort applied. It's
sure.
how much commitment you are applying to the endeavor. That's
Mm,
what I refer to as training hard. I don't care if you're doing, German 10 sets of 10, or you're doing Arthur Jones, one set to failure, or you're
mm,
training, the Dubois method. I don't
mm.
care how you are doing it. I don't care what format you're following. When I say I don't think you're training hard, I'm saying it does not look to me like your commitment to the method is adequate.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
is what I mean by that. I don't like that word intensity. I don't
Yeah.
you know I don't think it means what people want it to mean. It doesn't mean that you're trying really hard.
Mm,
That's not what it means, in at least in a physics term. There
mm.
could be some, subtext of, in the emotional concept or whatever. I don't give a fuck. But when I'm talking about weight training, I'm talking about the mechanistic, load times reps times sets.
Yeah.
Then
Sure.
subjectively and how much commitment did you put into that.
Yeah.
So I do
Yeah.
think that a lot of times when people run up to that barrier, they're not making progress,
Mm,
they leap to drugs when maybe because of all
sure.
the variable vectors in their life, maybe that training effort has eroded a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Look, I mean, I'll throw myself under the bus. I know I've gone through, and I don't know if you have, Rods. I mean, But I've gone through periods where, you know what, I can't, my training just sucks a bit at the moment. I've got something coming up. I'll go, instead of 50 megs of Anadrol, I'll go 100 just to get me over the line. And for short term, I think it does do what you want it to do. But I understand it's obviously,
But
that's,
and this is an interesting but, and I actually, this is a question. When you do that, does the effort follow the dosage? Because you have that greater dosage, are you now either motivated
engaged a
or,
little
dare
more.
I even say, instigated to now train harder?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's probably, yes, there's a little bit more of that because I'm putting little bit more in. Correct. So chicken or the egg, I suppose,
Yeah,
what's driving
that's an
what.
interesting thing. Is and and it's funny you mentioned the chicken and the egg, because again, I'm kind of becoming an armchair psychologist from watching all of these athletes over the years. You say chicken or the egg. That's, to me, is kind of the best diagnostic. If dosage moves and training doesn't, it's usually not the dosage that was the problem.
Yeah, okay.
When I see a dosage problem, it's somebody training harder. Their their training is outpacing their dosage.
Sure. And what would that
The,
look like?
well, what that would look like is, to some degree, a very, very high altitude version of the same things that happen to a natural. You're training as hard as you can and
Yeah.
just barely being ready to train again the next workout. You're training
Right.
as hard as you can and you're not actually putting load on the bar. You're not actually putting repetitions on the bar. You're simply training as hard as you can.
Spinning the wheels a little bit.
And then in that environment, if you raise the dosage, now the delta between training and recovery is a little bigger. So now training can scoot up to that level. Now you hit that barrier again. I don't want to. I don't want to be that guy to stroke the gray beard and be like, man, back in my day.
Yeah,
However,
but you are.
well, I'm not even saying I'm regaling it. I'm simply saying that this is true. There was a mythos, almost to the point of a mantra, that you must train up to your dosage.
Yeah. We've
That was a
discussed this, yeah.
that was a principle, a kind of a guiding light that, God damn it, if you're going to raise the dosage, dear God, you better buckle in.
Mm.
And I don't see that as much.
No, not
Maybe
at all.
even to the point where I don't see it at all. Yeah, and it's a little sad.
Mm. The yeah, that's good. Sad. You're getting sad about something. There you go. Um, emotion.
Yeah,
It's a
I'm
waste of
growing.
time. Waste of time.
I'm
Yeah,
developing.
maturing, perhaps. Recovery. Interesting. Like, do you, and to retort what you were saying, do you think when the dosages escalate, it's just the dosages that are enhancing recovery, or like what we just discussed, are you then putting more effort, a little bit more effort into recovery because you have more, like a chicken or the egg kind of thing?
Well,
Like, does it really? I guess I've heard others, and I don't know if you've actually said this as well, that the recovery capacity of gear is like that's not the magic to gear compared to a natural. Like it's not just the fact you recover more. It's multifactorial, but it's not like a sweeping. Yeah, you can recover more. You do more training if you're on subs. Like, share your thoughts on that.
well, of course that's part of it, but even that is very first of all, everyone listening, everyone out there should own the book The Stress of Life. A guy named Hans
Yes.
Selye did some very fundamental work back in the 1930s and 40s, wrote a book in the 50s, I believe, titled The Stress of Life. And you could do a book report on the book, and literally
Yeah.
a paragraph and a picture would explain everything you need to know. But it's sort of like that MC equals MC squared thing, where just these
Mm.
couple of characters suddenly now explain how the entire goddamn universe works.
Yeah.
If you take the time to pick all of the bits apart. So where I'm going with this is in the book, you'll see this kind of graph and you'll see a check mark. And there's where the open mouth of the check mark is
baseline.
That's you at baseline. And then you train and you actually get smaller and weaker. You go down. You make an inroad into your abilities. Then you recover. Now, recovery, literally, if you look up the word recover, it means to recoup lost. It means to return to baseline. It means to recover what was used. So recovery is actually just the return to the condition where you could train again at 100%.
Yes.
But that's not actually the goal of athletics. The goal of athletics is inroad, recovery, and super compensation.
Sure.
And people leave that out. And I know when they say recovery, they mean that whole bit, but they don't say that. So right out of the gate, I just want to take the time to nomenclate that when most people are just saying, oh, well, steroids improve recovery. Yes, they improve recovery, but they also improve that bit beyond recovery, that compensatory mechanism.
So do you think that's kind of, if you were to, I mean, maybe semantics, but like when we talk about recovery and that line is a continuum, like do you think if you were to pinpoint it, it's that you get more of that return on investment, like that more of that?
There's a ton of things we could talk about under this, but just in the subject of recovery, that is basically where muscle growth comes from. You got to remember that the body operates as a very complex and phenomenally intricate machine, but yet it is not a machine insofar as we have electric switches and knobs and spigots that we can turn off. So what happens is you train, you make damage, the body recovers, and the message that you are fully recovered, there's a time lag between crossing that recovery line and actually shutting off the mechanisms. So growth is actually just sort of a little bit of an overrun. It's just a couple extra minutes. It's like, imagine if you turned off your light switch, but the speed of light or the speed of electricity was only a couple of feet per second. So you turn off the switch and then there'd be a lag until the light knew it was off. That's how the body actually works. So you recover, and then we're recovered, and meanwhile the machinery's still going and going and going. Okay, now it's done. So now perfect recovery is actually 102%. So now 102% is the new normal. You train again, 102 is now 100. So then you go to 102. Well, that's 4 over the previous. That's how progress happens. So when anabolics are involved in improving recovery, they're basically speeding up that process. So now imagine if this recovery is going faster, but the message is still going slow. So you get more overrun. So that's a huge part of where anabolics do their magic. Now they do it. Now I'm not going to belabor it because it doesn't really help this conversation, but they also do a ton of other complementary things. Improving aggression. So maybe you actually train better. Improving carbohydrate and ion retention, so maybe you're a little plumper and rounder, and that improves leverage, and a ton of little enzymatic things here and there. Even the evil estrogen, which is sort of a byproduct, can still have some very positive effects. Now your joints are healthier, that makes training easier, on and on and on. The manufacture of red blood cells, which improves oxygenation, and it's hard to put your finger on why steroids work. It's sort of just everywhere you've got a place, they help.
Yeah. Beautiful. And okay, good. So all right. So that's when we talk about recovery, it's that getting that overlap, and that overlap, is that because you've kind of got a new norm that's influencing things, like the new norm, it needs to overlap to accommodate. It's Well, that Hans Selye checkmark thing, that is when I say that's kind of everything you need to know about exercise, I'm actually really understating it. It's literally everything you need to know about biology. For instance, that's how you get a suntan. Sun, damages your skin, checkmark goes down, and the skin recovers, and then overcompensates.
to
Yeah.
deal with the next. Even every person listening to this has, barbell driven calluses. That
Yep.
callus is exactly the same thing. Your hand is normal. You grind it against the barbell for a fucking hour.
Yeah.
It's worn down, check mark down. Then the body
Mm.
recovers and just a little bit extra to prepare you for the next workout. So
Yeah.
every biological response is that check mark in some format or another.
Yeah. The Cellier model, you could stop. Hand Cellier. Hand Cellier. There's another hand Cellier. Yeah.
And,
All over the place.
and the really interesting part about Hans Selye, and I'm not a fanboy. It's just weird that his basic stress response model is the foundations of biology, pretty much, period. But interestingly, he's also, if you go to his little Wikipedia page, he's actually acknowledged as the father of modern pharmacology.
Very nice.
Yeah,
We'll chip our hats to him.
I would say.
All right, so let's rewind. Let's go back into this toxicity kind of thing.
Yeah.
To kind of wrap up this conversation, I suppose. And you could go so many rabbit holes we could go down, but just in a general sense, like toxicity on blood work. I mean, we kind of rattled off the CRP and all those kind of things. And I think most of the guys listening and watching will be up to speed with if they spent any time in the group, they kind of know what markers to look for. So toxicity could fall under all those on blood work. What I want to do is get your thoughts on what about maybe what we just spoke about, like this inability to recover. Maybe toxicity could be starting to manifest in a lack of maybe the toxicity is causing what we're talking about in regards to maybe having less a bioavailable, we'll call it androgens, to carry out said task, and that is stopping you from recovering or being able to perform at the next workout. But what are some of the things that you can, and I know I've put you on the spot here, but on the fly, think about how could this, like, okay, we're not running blood work right now, we should, but like what other things, like shitty sleep, could we say, well, maybe the toxicity is starting to build, like what kind of things that theoretically could be seen, like the stuff we kind of track, blood pressure coming up, is that, well, we're getting a little bit more toxic, can we put it under that blanket term?
Well, the first thing I would say is, again, you need to be a little bit careful with just blanket words like overtraining or this. So when you start saying toxic, there's loads of, I don't want to say layers, that's not quite right.
Yeah.
But there's loads of flavors, if you will. There's, of course, the thing that you're momentarily dialed into, and correctly so, hepatic toxicity, things that are egregious your liver. Yes, that's going to raise liver values, ALT, AST, bilirubin, all those things are going to go up because the liver rather specifically is doing something to those things in its own compartment. But meanwhile, you also have enzymes produced in the pancreas. You have, I momentarily drew a blank on the enzyme. Wow, damn it.
What organ?
There's a ton of ACEs manufactured in the pancreas. That's such a generic.
Esterases.
There's a slew of them, including the one that breaks down the simple sugars. My brain just completely blanked on it. Momentarily, just believe me, there's a bunch of enzymes produced in your pancreas, and they're all very important. Moving up a layer from that.
Amylase?
Amylase is exactly the one I was looking for. Thank you, sir. Moving up a layer from that, you also now have the idea that there are sort of non-hepatic toxins, for instance, heavy metals. So when you're looking at toxicity, you need, and then there's also, even strangely, even exercise itself generates waste products, free radicals, if you will. Those free radicals, in a sense, are a negative or a toxic component and need to be stripped away. So you've got all of these different layers. You've got hepatic health, which we can track on the basic, metabolic markers in a blood work. We also have, moving up, pancreatic or enzymatic markers, which we have the ability to test, but we usually don't.
Yeah.
Moving up from that, we also now have heavy metals, which are a whole separate thing
Yeah.
that can come from drugs, can come from food, can come from groundwater. So there's a lot of places, usually seafood, but not always. Then moving up, we also have food allergens, and those we would normally find either in the blatant inflammation markers, the A1C, the HbA, those sorts of things, or actual immune markers, actual white count
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
elevations.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sonophils and all that. Yeah, and your CB2,
Exactly. Neutrophils oftentimes, but
neutrophils.
nonetheless, that compartment. So when you start talking about toxicity, you have to kind of look for it kind of under every rock.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
that
yeah, for sure. And would you also could you, and I know uh, anyone that again has spent any time in the members group, the colored, three green, three red, colored veggies,
absolutely.
and don't eat like a dick. I mean, full stop, end of story. You're not going to engage in flexible dieting. Like, do you think like some of these shitty food choices, and again, I'm throwing foods under the bus, which if they meet a calorie intake, they could still get changed. But you know where I'm going with this, like a lot
I
of
do.
highly processed foods. Like, can we do you think there's some baggage coming along with that for some individuals creating this, like I said, with the gluten intolerance and then this enzyme elevated, then, we get less bang for our buck. So do you think foods could be thrown
Know,
into this discussion as well?
I don't. You and I. It's odd because well, it's not odd. It's probably rather appropriate. But we talk about athletics. You and I talk about sports and bodybuilding and powerlifting and
Mm.
sometimes niche, interesting sports. But that's where our thoughts and our conversations. It's kind of the only reason we communicate.
Mm.
I'm I walk a very dichotomous lane when it comes to processed foods. On one hand, I sincerely believe they largely play no role in athletics. In when I say no role, I mean they offer no benefit. And
Yeah,
anything that they do offer probably comes with a complement of negatives. But now moving separately, and I know this isn't the nature of the conversation, but moving separately into Gen Pop, where
sure.
total calorie intake is pretty low,
Yeah, yeah.
comparable
Yeah.
to athletes, half, easily.
Mm.
I honestly don't think that processed foods are the evil that everyone makes them out to be for Gen Pop.
Sure.
By and large, processed foods are cheap,
Yeah,
accessible,
yeah,
shelf-stable, which
yeah.
by and large is so much better than the alternative.
Sure. Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah. I'll
just
buy that.
I just want to say that when we're talking about athletics, it's like saying, oh, like I have this Ferrari and it doesn't run good on regular unleaded. Like, no shit. No
Yeah, yeah,
fucking
for
kidding.
sure. For
But now
sure.
if you've got a fucking, Prius, put whatever in
Yeah,
it. It doesn't matter. It's a Prius.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's kind of where I'm going with that part.
Mm.
But interestingly, Rowdon, I think there's a kind of I guess donut wouldn't work in a bodybuilding conversation. So some other round, it's the bagel of life.
Well,
When it comes to
yeah,
bodybuilding, I think exactly what you're proposing is actually why the bodybuilding diet has been whittled down to broccoli, asparagus, white rice, white potato, chicken, and fish. I actually think that's why it got so narrow, was to sort of just kind of self-select out the risk factors.
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, potentially. Well, that's interesting. I think that's the first time anyone would have heard you talk about Gen Pop come out of your mouth. There you go, processed foods. And I know where you're coming from there. Like mass produced, you can still hit your calorie target. And fundamentally, it's management of calories that you're looking at. Absolutely
Absolutely.
get that. Okay, so what about like where I was going, like sleep starting to go to, digestion going off? Like, do you think any of these things? I don't know. It can
Well,
be. I guess I'm looking for a bit of a cheat sheet.
no,
Give me some bullet
I
points
do,
when
and
outside of blood work.
the funny part is I actually, I don't want to say have, I don't have been like formalized, like, oh, I have, here's my cheat sheet, but I do have a sort of checklist. But there's a big, deep caveat a very, very big red asterisk. Bodybuilders, powerlifters, strongmen, typically those alpha assholes that go into those sorts of sports, have a very, very skewed concept of time. That is the problem. They have a very, very skewed concept of time. I squatted today, my back hurt tomorrow. Obviously, the two are connected. Yeah. But this idea that I woke up today with a headache, it must be yesterday's workout. No, it might be 6 weeks ago's bad use of Anadrol that's just now showing up in red blood cells and blood congestion. So the cause and effects get a little further apart when you start talking metabolism. So hear me out. I do have a checklist, but it's not a today checklist. It's a 3-week checklist.
Sure.
And the number one things I would go down, and I know you love digestion, but honestly, it's the last one on my list. But the first three, appetite, sex drive, sleep quality.
All right. I have heard you reference these, so this is good.
Those three. Now, if you see a downturn, it's transient. I mean, bad sleep can be a cup of coffee, a fucking argument. It could be anything. So I need to see a systematic downturn on those three for 3 weeks. Maybe not every day of the 3 weeks, but I need to see it repetitively over 3 weeks. If I see that, I can't swear to you like, oh, it's toxicity or it's that. But I can swear to you that if those three ain't working, you ain't working right. We need to stop and have a chat.
So it was digestion, sleep.
No.
And
sleep quality, sex drive.
Sleep quality, and
my brain just stopped working. I just said it. It just came out of my mouth. Holy shit. Well, you can tell I haven't slept in a fucking week. And then, like I said, digestion. Appetite, sleep, and sex drive. And digestion, I would put on that list. But like I said, I devalue that one. I kind of only count that one like a half a risk factor. But I know it sounds corny, and I think it comes up in my conversations more often than maybe is perfectly appropriate. But I can't stress to you enough how valuable sex drive is as a marker. If a creature, as a biologist, if a creature doesn't want to mate, it's broken. It's not doing its job in nature. Like every single creature on this earth, its purpose is to make more little creatures. Like from fucking ferrets to giraffes. That's their shit. So I can't emphasize enough. I mean, if you're not if you're deep in prep or you're something where there's some really absurd outside conditions. But I mean, if you're in a zone where things should be going well and you're not Randy, it ain't going well. It just ain't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, interesting. So like you would go rather than, I mean, that pretty much covers it all anyway, doesn't it? I mean, when you think about it, everything can kind of
and appetite, sleep, and sex drive. I'm being very genteel. Dr. Fred Hatfield, who was probably the closest thing to a mentor I had, said that he said, if you don't want to fuck it, eat it and kill it. Or fucking kill it and eat it. That was the order. If your first thoughts are, can I kill it, can I eat it? If those aren't your first three thoughts, something's wrong.
Well, look, I mean, fuck, you can fuck it, then eat it, then kill it afterwards. I mean, hey,
just, I guess if details, you get excited, details. I guess, but the principle, I mean, literally, the principle is the principle. Like that's what he was intimating. Is like if you're truly, the alpha in the pack, like that's where your mind should be.
All right. Excellent. I think that was something, if I think about it, I expected from you, and we have discussed that previously. So it wasn't like if this happens, if you get a little irritation, you get a headache, it means there's toxicity. But yeah, I think that's pretty comprehensive, to be honest. Now, what about we are seeing those things. What would be the plan of attack? Would you kind of then let's run blood work. Let's and is this kind of where you might have a bridge or something, to use terms that the guys would be familiar with? You kind of
Yeah.
down, you've been running things for a little while, you've been progressing, the sleep's starting to go, you're losing your appetite, and you're not feeling like eating and killing
No,
something. So
well, I would go down a relatively systematic checklist. For instance,
sure.
when is this happening? I mean, obviously it's happening now, but I mean, in the
Mm.
context of the backdrop, is this the beginning of a
Yeah.
course, the middle of the course, the end of the course, after a course? Like, when is it happening? That would determine sort of your, mode of action. Um,
Mm.
Also, I would say the very first thing I would do, like before, raising dosage, lowering dosage, before any of that, the first thing
Sure.
I would do is say, let's just fall back on some good behavior. Let's take 2 days off from the gym and cardio.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah, 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 yeah.
dial into foods that we know are safe, just things that
Yeah.
you have eaten your whole life that are not a problem.
Yeah.
Just, dial into the
Banana bread.
yeah, mom's breakfast kitchen. Like, just dial into some
Yeah.
safe shit. Take two
Yeah.
days off from training, take 2 days off from cardio. And then again, it's sort of that three. That three comes up all the time. 3 weeks, 3 days.
Mm.
On the third day, let's reassess. It's possible that we were just, we still have the
Sure.
Ferrari, we still have the high
Yeah,
performance
yeah, yeah, yeah.
fuel, but we were just driving it too hard. We ran the
Yeah.
engine hot, and we just need to pull
Yeah.
over and settle down. Could
Yeah, yeah,
be,
yeah,
could
yeah,
be. Now,
yeah,
but it also just allows enough time for kind of bad decisions to settle down. It's very easy in the heat of the moment to just make a bad decision based on panic. I really, really think that kind of two,
yeah,
three
yeah,
day
yeah,
buffer just lets you get just,
yeah.
where are you at? How
Grounded. Yep.
important is it?
Yep. 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 Yep.
Are your balls really on fire? Just calm down.
Mm. Mm.
And based on, those things, like, are we in the middle of a block, the end of the block?
Mm.
A lot of times when you just go down the checklist, it answers itself. And in a perfect world, and I realize that about half the people listening to this are definitely not going to be in a perfect world, but in the perfect world, when you go down the checklist and you're kind of like, oh, sleep's fucked up, my appetite's fucked up, I'm not Randy, and then when you go down the checklist and you're like, and that's exactly where I was supposed to be. I'm at the end of a block. I'm at the biggest,
Mm.
highest body weight I've ever been. I'm the strongest I've ever been. I'm buried in this fucking training. You know what?
Mm.
I should be broken. And then the next blank is, and now I fucking rest.
Yeah, yeah. I like it. That 3 days is good. That's long enough. Pull things back a little bit, clean up the food a little bit, see if it's something. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. All right. Well, that kind of we dived headfirst into it. Definitely something that you are on board with, and the blood
Yeah.
work, which should give us all the answers we kind of need. But you're going to see some of these things starting to manifest and develop, and I guess context. See where you are in prep.
Yeah.
Where your balls deep, or you're at the. And I mean, I mentioned Will at the start of this, but I keep going back to him. And one of the things we spoke about, and he's since been diagnosed and treating, type 1 diabetes. And
Yeah.
at that point in time, he was eating, and it was just, he didn't have any more appetite, and he couldn't get his body weight up. Like, it was the thing. I don't know if his sex drive was any good, but the things were kind of what we just discussed were rare. And then shortly after that, he got diagnosed as having,
Yeah.
type 1 diabetes, and now he's treated and getting on top of things. But that kind of, this just one example, and I'm pretty sure, like, and all of us, watching this are kind of thinking, oh, you know what, I've been there, and yeah, I
Yeah.
lost my appetite, and these types of things. So I think that's absolutely awesome. But yeah, really, really interesting that the toxicity can be the very thing that is going to, and that again, that blanket term, and you just explained all the different layers of toxicity that we could be referring to, but that blanket, and
Yeah.
we are dumbing it down, but something that's absolutely relevant, that
But
you may be limiting your gains by just not being aware of this concept and dealing with it.
yeah. And now, we're approaching an hour, so probably a good time to dial it down. But I do want to pepper in
Yeah.
just a couple little things that, as we're going along, I'm kind of making a little ledger of, oh, I should mention that, I
Yeah.
should mention this. The tenor of this conversation might lead people to think that I have suddenly changed my position on the idea of taking like liver support and herbs and spices and things and over the counter remedies
Yeah.
to keep liver enzymes down because, well, that's toxicity, that's showing
Yeah.
toxicity.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, that's exactly 180 degrees incorrect thinking on anyone's part who is dreaming that up. I'm not saying that having high liver enzymes is healthy or good, but imagine now a scenario where this conversation comes to life
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yep.
toxicity is actually rearing its head, but you are intervening and removing those red
Yeah.
marks from your lab work.
Yep.
Now, when you look at the lab work, you're like, I can't figure out what's going on because these numbers are more or less
Yeah. Yeah.
normal.
Yep. 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 Yep.
So just know that just because it is in your power to change red ink to white ink doesn't
Mhm.
mean you change the metabolic feature. You just changed the color of the ink on the paper that the lab gave you.
Would you also, in the same breath, you're treating the blood pressure like that's we could throw that in there and say, well,
100%.
clearly something's egregious, like
No matter
and
what bad drug choices you make, you can just keep swallowing lisinopril until the numbers on the paper are good. I don't think that's a proper way to live one's life. And by the way, comically, but yet rather appropriately, you start swallowing blood pressure. Name your drug. I don't care what, but
yeah, yeah,
you start swallowing your blood pressure medicine to get your blood pressure in zone until you win. You scored.
mm,
But now there's all that new drug in you to add to dun, dun,
toxic
dun,
burden, yeah,
toxicity. So
yeah,
there's no free ride. You're going to pay for it somewhere. I think you're better off paying for it with good behavior.
yeah. Because that situation would then lend itself to what we spoke about at the start, more gear, like then you take more because blood pressure is now controlled. We're not getting the growth. So we're not getting the growth we should be.
Yeah,
Let's bump up we got BP under control, liver's looking good, kidneys are fine. Let's now ramp things up when in actual fact that very for example, the P450 is through the roof and you can ramp it up all you want. You ain't getting any more return on investment.
exactly.
And more stress on the organism.
Yep. I do believe that is at least partially culpable for some of these problems.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I mean that's just really you and I talking about shit, and it was a
Yeah,
fun conversation. And I don't know if
absolutely.
anyone got something out of that, but we certainly enjoyed it. So yeah, we'll have to do it again soon, mate.
Yeah, man, absolutely. For those listening, we're going to publish this video both on YouTube, which is almost certainly where you're probably going to be seeing it when you do, and also it will be nested in the Team Evil GSP member site, and may even make an appearance on the Dubois Method Facebook group.
It may do.
And
Awesome,
if
bros.
anyone out there has any thoughts on what should be the official title of this
Mm,
this
mm.
spastic
Who
video
knows what it is?
adventure, yeah,
Yeah, this shenanigans.
yeah.
Shenanigans, that's all it is. Occasionally we'll talk about cool stuff.
All right, Mr.
Yeah.
Dubois.
All right,
Thank you for your
pleasure to be
time.
mine.
Have a have a
Likewise, and
have a short black for me, would you please?
dude, I'm up to I've had three doubles so far in the space of about 3 hours. So I'll
Lovely.
double each hour. So I'll do one more for the road, and I'll monitor the heart rate and blood pressure and like, but if the heart rate's up, I'll take a
Beta blocker and start again.
tell them a siren, yeah, and we'll go again. Oh man, enjoy. Adios,
Thank
amigos.
you.
Talk
Thank
soon.
you.